Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. You know how much we do appreciate it. You know, I have on the line one of my favorite people in the world and somebody who I haven't spoken to in several years. It's Brother John F. Brother John, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Sean?
Hey man, I'm doing really well, but as you know, it's really getting hard to keep up on the collapse. You know, as I say when I speak with Andy Hoffman, we're documenting the collapse, but I'm telling you, John, it's just happening almost too fast now to keep up, isn't it?
Yeah, it's happening in real time, and the craziness just goes on. I mean, we got this story with Glencore, and then we have this Trafigura head guy dies yesterday. I mean, it's crazy stuff.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about the Glencore grab, as you coined it. Of course, you released one of your members-only videos on September 28th called Glencore Grab, and it's definitely something that I want to speak to you about in detail, because to be honest with you, John, I didn't even know about Glencore. I'd never heard of the company, and I know in your Wikipedia reading about the company, it was the third largest family-owned business on Earth, and one of the largest companies nobody's ever heard of. So that's an incredibly important story. I do want to get your take on it, but I just want to revisit for people the fact that John and I have been documenting this collapse and documenting the manipulation of the silver market now going back probably more than 5 years. And John, here's an interesting statistic that I keep throwing out now in interviews because it's so important for people to understand. According to John Williams, the 1980 inflation-adjusted all-time high for silver was $138 an ounce. Now, according to John Williams, the 1980 inflation-adjusted all-time high for silver is $601 because all the Fed knows how to do is print. Don't you find that astounding now that silver is back down to 14 bucks an ounce?
Yeah, it's really crazy, but they're maintaining all of their firepower against the precious metals because, as I said for the longest time, this is their Achilles heel. This is what is going to expose their system, and it doesn't take much at all. We've got this story here now from the latest Steve St. Angelo SRS Rocco that now Glencore is talking about selling forward its gold and silver output, to help pay down its debt. So no matter what happens, they're always concentrating their efforts against gold and silver. And the reason why, of course, is that's really the only way people can protect themselves from what's coming is physical, in your hand, the real thing. And, I mean, just the mind control and the mass media about the importance of those. You only need to go back, say, well, you were quoting the top from 79, but I mean, you can go back even to the 80s or even in the 90s. Normal Wall Street recommended asset allocations were 10% for precious metals, and if you do 10% for precious metals and 5% of that silver, what if you took all the investment dollars out there and took 5% of them and put them into physical silver? What are we talking about? Thousands of dollars an ounce? They don't talk about that anymore. They don't even mention it, because that's how vulnerable it is.
Yeah, and they can't mention it in any sort of serious tone because you're right, the market is so tiny in silver, it could easily be overrun with real investment money, especially if people are demanding physical silver. And maybe we should talk a little bit about the COMEX and the fraud on the COMEX. I mean, you want to talk about epic fraud. Before we get into Glencore, let's talk about the COMEX. I mean, I think what they do over there is they specialize in fraud.
Well, the whole thing is kind of absurd. I think it was FOFOA was the first one who mentioned that only 5% of silver that's consumed by manufacturing and investment and et cetera is delivered on the COMEX. It's not delivered there. So why is it setting the price? Why are these people trading derivatives back and forth setting the price? Why does the price of silver explode up or down at 8:30 or 9:30 Eastern time whenever they open up, and the whole world is just waiting to find out what they're going to do on the COMEX? Who cares what they're going to do on the COMEX? I mean, but they do. They still have control. Now, I think China is definitely making plays to get commodity trading, specifically for precious metals, into a real time, real physical market, and maybe take some of that business away, or maybe do away with the COMEX. But as it stands right now, the world still watches what the COMEX says these things are worth. Now we know that with silver, um, I did a video on the silver premiums on the 90-ounce bags, and now we're seeing these premiums on the Eagles, and that video is called Silver Cycle, and the idea is that the silver cycle is broken. Basically what I explained was that the way that silver has been recycled for many decades through coin stores has been, people selling their junk, and that's why the junk silver is always quoted at a certain price below spot, and then the coin stores don't bother with it, trying to resell it. But that has become that more and more so. But in the past, they just send it off to the refiners, melt it down, and turn it into those bars. Well, with Amex offering to pay $2 and $3 above spot for junk, that's not going to happen anymore. So that's an example of where the COMEX is no longer setting the price anyway. We have people paying $22 a coin for silver eagles. We got prices as high as $24 an ounce being paid for junk silver, when we've got a price of, COMEX silver down around $14.
That's right. And, when we see these big precious metal slams, too, as you used to document, because you used to actually release your videos to the public on YouTube solely, and now you have a subscription model. So I do want to hear a little bit about that. And I just want people to realize that, because if they're not seeing your work, that's because they need to subscribe. And, of course, you can go to brotherjohnf.com to do that and sign up. I think, Brother John, correct me if I'm wrong, you're releasing somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 15 videos to your subscribers per month, but only 1 or 2 of those get out on YouTube, correct?
Right. We release one about every month, but we do about 13 or 14 for the members. And there are various reasons that we did that. You're very familiar with the shills, trolls, attacks, and all the stuff that goes on YouTube. And so that's one of the reasons. There are other reasons, but so yeah, if people want to sign up, they can come to brotherjohnf.biz and sign up for the member site. And there's kind of a little community there. And so that's how we're doing that.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted people to know, because you've always been one of my favorite analysts, and I just wanted people to understand how they can get your information. So, but one of the things that you were very, very good at doing when you were releasing all your videos to the public, John, was quantifying how the criminals throw, in some cases, hundreds of millions of ounces, billions of ounces of paper silver at the market to cause the paper price to crash. People need to understand that, yes, the price of silver has come all the way back down, far below where we thought it would ever go again. And again, according to John Williams at Shadow Stats, it should be probably $600 an ounce when it goes back to its all-time high. But the fact of the matter is, these criminals throw oodles and oodles of endless paper precious metals at the market to drive the physical price lower, because they cannot allow the world to re-embrace precious metals. It would kill the fiat system.
That's right. And it's, primarily the Western governments, the Anglo-American Empire, and they're just trying to maintain control of the current system, which is, of course, we know the petrodollar system, and that's kind of crumbling at the edges right now. But they also have the gigantic paper market financial system. And if you look at the amount of money that is put into stocks and put into bonds, and it's basically people's retirement, but it's maybe 3 degrees of separation, so they don't really even know what they're investing in. And, that's how you get companies like Glencore, which was spun off to the public in 2011. That's why we're actually seeing, the cratering of the stock price from it's about an 87% decline so far from top to bottom. But the other ones like Trafigura, they're not even publicly traded, so you don't know. But they'll spin off these companies to the public, and then mom and pop ended up with them in their retirement accounts, and of course then they go down to zero. That's how the game is played, and people never learn. I mean, this is going to be, we're looking at the third time, the dot-com crash, and then we had the 2008 crisis. Stocks are rolling over again now, and you can see people starting to get nervous, but of course they have all of their assets in these Wall Street pieces of paper that is someone's promise to pay you something when you reach a certain age. Of course, they're just going to default on them. That's what they've always done.
Right, and there's so many trillions of dollars in the bond market, and Let's talk about that briefly because, as you and I and the listeners probably all know at this point, China is selling their treasuries. They've publicly said so. They've even warned Washington they're getting out of U.S. treasuries. And I want to share this with everybody. This comes from Willem Middelkoop, the author of The Big Reset, who gave a presentation at a conference in Rotterdam, Netherlands on September 26th. And I want to play this for you, John, and get your impressions on it. This is Willem Middelkoop talking about a conference he attended in China in which they were talking about establishing a new financial global system. Listen to this.
This conference was all about planning a new worldwide financial system using the SDR, the IMF money, as the successor for the dollar. So the Chinese are very open, and they made it very clear that they feel being trapped in the current dollar system. They use the word trapped. We're trapped in the current dollar system. They want to cooperate with the IMF, they want to cooperate with the US, and they want to use the SDR as a new world reserve currency.
Were you able to hear that okay, John?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to play that for you, John, because as Willem says in that interview, the Great Monetary Reset is being designed and planned right now, and people need to understand what's going on behind the scenes. It isn't so much behind the scenes in China. He says it's common knowledge, but you're not going to hear about that from CNBC here in this country, are you, John?
No, and there's a lot of speculation as to what China's game plan is. We know that China plans a long ways out in the future. And, some have speculated that they really want to be part of this thing, and others have speculated, no, they want to make their currency the next reserve currency. Now, I don't really know whether that's true or not. I think it was Jeff Nielsen of Bullion Bulls Canada pointed out that China's too smart to try to do that. They don't want to end up in the position that the United States is in right now, which is, world police and having to fund the world police. So maybe China really does just want to have its share in some basket. Now, they were pretty much slapped in the face by the IMF when they, applied earlier this year, and it was rejected. And then that set off a series of strange events, Chinese yuan devaluation, and then a bunch of ports blowing up over there. So real craziness. But the big question is going to be China. And China, of course, is at the center of this Glencore thing and the commodities thing, and the Baltic Dry Index, being basically a dead man floating. So China's at the center of all this stuff. I think I saw an article recently where China consumes 60% of the world's concrete. They have like 70% of the world's crane. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Copper, zinc. If they slow down, we're talking about with Glencore, if Goldman predicted that if there's a 5% drop in their commodities, they're finished. Their bonds, well, we know their bonds right now are already trading like junk. Some of them are like 70 cents on the dollar. That's been covered on Zero Hedge. So China has all the cards in this thing, and that's who everybody should be watching.
Now, John, as you know, China has probably much more in terms of gold reserves than it's let on publicly. And you mentioned Jeff Nielsen, our buddy over at Bullion Bulls. Jeff has noted that it's completely acceptable that China has not disclosed more gold, because really all they were quote unquote required to do is report any of the gold that they've imported. They don't have to report any gold that they've mined. That information can all be kept privately. So maybe people like Alistair McLeod are correct, and China really does have, say, 10,000 tons or more of gold. Nielsen puts it closer to 4,000, 4,500 tons of gold, but certainly more than the 1,700 or so tons that they've declared publicly. I want your opinion on this, John. Knowing how important physical gold is to central banks, knowing how important it is to nation states like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, like India, like China, what do you make of the clip that I just played you, in which Middelkoop just said that China is more than happy to play ball with the Rothschild IMF and the criminal banksters? Is there any chance at all that they may just introduce another global fiat currency, sans gold altogether?
Well, sure, anything's possible. Anything can happen, but I just don't see that being the case. I mean, if you think about the talk we've had lately about they want to go with the cashless society, And there's a war on cash and stuff like that. And the immediate reply to that is, okay, well, how are they going to buy drugs? Because we know that the banks already launder trillions of dollars in the drug trade.
That's right.
We don't know how many black budgets are funded through illegal drugs.
Yeah, on the
So,
record, HSBC, one of the most criminal banks on planet Earth. Absolutely.
yeah, so I mean, that's not going to happen unless they find a way to keep that drug trade going. So, same thing with gold. I mean, gold is considered, what was it, a tier one asset by the banks. The banks have always considered gold to be money, central banks, I mean. I don't see that changing. Maybe it could. Maybe they can do their cashless society. But for me, there always will be black markets. You can look at countries like Venezuela, Argentina. How successful are they actually in maintaining any of this stuff? And this kind of actually wraps back to Glencore and, Mark Rich and how that whole thing was started. I mean, Mark Rich and Company, basically their business model was to, sell to people that nobody else was allowed to sell to. That was, I mean, he even bragged about that. I think he said his biggest profits come from selling to despot regimes. So they sold to the apartheid government of South Africa. They sold to Castro, Angola, the Sandinistas, Gaddafi, Ceausescu, Pinochet, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and BCCI, the Bank of Criminals and Crooks International. So they've always made their money through black markets. There will always be black markets. I just don't see a way around that. There's always going to be free markets to a certain extent. And that's the problem that we're seeing. That's why this whole thing is starting to, build up and getting ready to blow, is because with precious metals, these guys are allowed to do pretty much anything they want to do except buy them. And they're with the base metals, they're allowed to do anything they want to do except lower the price, because they're trying to keep these prices up. That's why you had a couple years ago you had Zero Hedge reporting on an article called "Spot the Goldman and Glencore Aluminum Warehouses." I don't know if you remember that story.
I do. Yep.
But basically, they were delaying delivery of base metals for up to 2 years, and it was to prop up the price, and and try to get a corner the market, essentially, which they try to do a lot of times. It's like a mirror image. It's the exact opposite of the precious metals. With the base metals, they're trying to keep those prices up, and one of the reasons why they do that is because we talked about many times, and Jeff Nielsen from Bullion Bulls was the first one to bring up this idea about silver being a secondary metal. In other words, it's mined. It's not they're not mining the silver. They're mining the base metals, and they get the silver as a bonus, sort of thing. And Jeff has always pointed out that that's simply a function of price. It has nothing to do with, most people think, well, that's a primary silver mine. Oh, that must mean there's a lot of silver there. No, that's not what it means. It just means it's not profitable to mine the silver. It's more profitable to mine the zinc or the copper. Well, if silver actually reached its price, the one that you talked about, say some Shadow Stats price, say silver went to $500 or something, then every one of those mines is going to turn into a primary silver mine. And they're going to be mining it for the silver, and they're going to get tons of zinc and copper on the side, and that stuff's going to sell for pennies. So this is the way they've been doing it.
Yeah, you're right. And, let's talk about Glencore and the commodities meltdown. Now, you noted in your video here, as I was learning about Glencore, much of it was from you reading the Wikipedia entry. Glencore was formed in 1974 by Clinton buddy and uber criminal Mark Rich, who, of course, Clinton pardoned on his last day in office. And Glencore, again, the third largest family business in the world and the largest company you've never heard of. What do you think is going on with Glencore? Because as you know, Andy Hoffman talks a lot about the collapsing commodities complex. As we see record demand for physical silver and gold, we see a dwindling physical supply and the death of mining companies. That's the big story. Do you think that what's going on with Glencore, I mean, you noted in your video that what they love to do is flip these companies out to the public right before they decimate them. And in May 2011, Glencore launched an IPO. It's a crazy story. It reads like a crime novel. What do you make of Glencore? Let's just talk big picture, and then maybe we can funnel down.
Well, the flipping it to the public sort of thing, this is a standard Wall Street scam. That's how they run things. You can look at the pay of these CEOs. Who's this guy we have now, this Ivan Glassenberg, worth billions, but probably not so much anymore. But they take these companies, they make them public, and then what they do is they issue themselves options on the stock. They pile up a whole bunch of debt, run the stock all the way up, cash out their options, and they're billionaires. That's the standard operating model. Now, what Glencore did was that they kind of doubled down. They did a purchase that's actually Glencore Extrata, and they paid like 39 billion or something for and a share swap for another company to get more mining assets. They kind of did a double down on that, and they were probably betting that commodities were going to snap back, and they were going to make a ton of money. Problem is that China kind of slowed down a little bit, and since they take up so much of the commodities, there's been continued pressure on commodity prices. Now, what happened was that Goldman came out and they kind of backhandedly recommended a downgrade of Glencore's debt, and they have about $31 billion in debt. And so I'll quote Zero Hedge here. This is what they say: Glencore is first and foremost a trading desk which serves as a counterparty with trillions in derivatives notional exposure to virtually every other commodity using and trading entity in the world, and taken to the extreme. So they give a scenario here of how this could force the Fed's hand, and they explain here: if commodity prices drop another 5%, and then the rating agencies go ahead and downgrade the debt, because the debt hasn't been downgraded, it's just trading like junk. The market's already downgraded their debt. That could cause a waterfall cascade of margin and collateral calls, and that could leave trillions of derivative contracts in limbo. That could cause a contagion, that could cause a deflationary shock, and then that could force the Fed's hand into something like QE4. So they're basically saying that Glencore is the AIG of the commodities world. But the big concern I'm talking about here with this Zero Hedge article is these counterparty risks and derivative risks. Yeah. Now, they're calling them the next AIG. If you remember with AIG, what most people don't realize, a lot of people in the alternative community have pointed out, but the bailout of AIG, takeover of AIG, had nothing to do with the AIG. In fact, we know that Hank Greenberg sued because he lost a ton of money on that. It was about bailing out the counterparties, and that was Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs should have gone bankrupt. We know that. And a lot of them, JP Morgan, all the rest should have gone bankrupt. But there's the boys in the club, and then there's the boys outside of the club. Lehman found out about that one, so did Bear Stearns. And there's the ones they bail out, and they're the ones that they don't bail out. Now, if you look at a video, I think it's a really good video. If you haven't seen it, it's John Titus' channel on YouTube called Best Evidence.
Yeah, I just actually posted that, and the kleptocracy one. They came from Planet Klepto. His latest really knocked my socks off.
Yeah, that's the one. So he really makes the case and proves that the Federal Reserve basically is bailing out these corrupt banks at the expense of the middle class. That's what they do. Goldman got 100% on their money for this junk that should have been pennies on the dollar. Now, with Glencore, could something like that happen? Absolutely. We could have Glencore's, their bonds continue to fall in price. We could have the public equity wiped out, which, I mean, really looking at the chart, this one looks like an Enron. It looks like a WorldCom. That's what the chart looks like. It's bouncing in the last couple of days, but it really looks like it's going to go under. If it goes under, like you said, then the vultures are going to come in and devour the carcass. But, what's going to happen to the mines? You have to remember that if your assets are these mines, what are those really worth? Especially if the price of the commodities they're mining are so low. It's my speculation that silver is already being mined at a loss. What happens when these base metals start to be a losing proposition? I mean, those assets might not be really worth that much until there's a reset. And then, yeah, the big Wall Street banks could own those assets.
Yeah. Well, the criminal banks run the planet, and the criminal families that own the banks run the central banks. It's just, it's so disheartening. Your site, Silver for the People, BrotherJohnF.com, is a great site because what you've been trying to do, John, is what I've been trying to do now for so many years, and it's remind people of the facts, because we're not going to hear about quantifiable facts from CNBC, from MSNBC, from CNN, or Fox News. You're only going to hear the government talking points and the propaganda. And one of the facts, John, is that physical precious metals have had value for 5,000 years. And the other fact is that these criminal central banks, these criminal international banks, have manipulated the prices of the precious metals below the cost of production, really, for both metals at this point, with endless oodles of paper. But before we lose you, John, I just want to round this conversation out by documenting the collapse. Now, earlier this week, we found out that Congress declared martial law for the second time in a month to avoid another government shutdown. Now, this comes to us from The Hill, and Russia Today reported on it. The use of martial law fast-tracks a spending bill by bypassing typical procedures, and it goes on to say that basically it rushes bills being passed so that Congress can't read them and they don't even know what they're passing. That is the definition of a banana republic, as I reported in my urgent bulletin on Thursday, John. The collapse is in progress, and now this shadow government, this criminal government, needs to use martial law to try to fund itself, because they're all out of cards to play. And that's why we have these conversations, so we can document the collapse so that people know what's going on so they can try to protect themselves.
Yeah, I saw that story. I mean, it's crazy. Congress is like a clown show now. I mean, you've got crybaby Boehner resigning the day after he met with the Pope. What was said there? I don't know. Janet Yellen nearly having a stroke on stage. What's up with that? The government hasn't been funded for the longest time. The national debt's been the same since March. Craziness. But, it's just like Glencore. I mean, if you look at Glencore with $30 billion of debt, and investment grade bonds, they're fine. They just keep humming along. What happens when their debt falls to junk and it's 10 or 12% on the interest rate? That's a whole nother ball game. They're bankrupt. Same thing with the United States government. They owe 18, 19 trillion. We don't know the number because they won't report it to us. What if interest rates went where they're supposed to go based on our solvency, say 10%, like Glencore? That's $1.9 trillion in interest payments. That's the entire tax base, pretty much. So that's bankruptcy, that's endgame, and that's probably why Janet Yellen nearly had a stroke.
Yeah, that was a remarkable piece of video, wasn't it? I mean, boy, even if she was just feeling ill on stage, if she had the flu, if she thought she was going to throw up, why wouldn't she, why wouldn't you, why wouldn't anyone just excuse themselves and say, I'm really sorry, I think I'm getting sick, or I'm really sorry, I have to excuse myself, I don't feel well. But she didn't do that. She stayed on stage, and it was the most painful minute or two of video I've just about ever seen. And, as we reported over at SGT Report, John, she was finally listening to herself and choking on her own lies.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to remember, if someone's actually having that ISA, ischemic, whatever that stroke thing, I mean, that's, if you actually have a stroke and you're losing oxygen to the brain, then, you don't even know what you're doing. Those are the signs that I saw. So I don't know. Others have speculated that, she's not the real power, and it's time for Stanley Fischer to step up and take charge. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Well, we know that she is just a puppet. Certainly she answers to the Rothschilds and all the bankers above her. Well, John, it's a real thrill to have gotten you on. I really do appreciate your time. Can you please tell people how they can subscribe to your excellent work and get your bi-daily updates?
Sure. They can come to brotherjohnf.biz, that's B-I-Z, and they can sign up there. Or they can go off the link from brotherjohnf.com. That's our public blog, Silver for the People, where we try to document this thing that's going down in real time, encouraging people to stack silver to protect themselves against what's coming.
Well, very good, John. Thank you so much. Any final words of advice, or maybe let's leave people with a piece of hope? Any glimmers of hope that you see?
Yeah, I would say that the more people that are involved in stacking physical gold and silver, and it seems like our audience is primarily in the United States and the Western world, the more that real money is salted through the population, then, when a collapse comes, there's going to be some real wealth to start the next system. So I encourage everybody to protect themselves now before the system collapses, even if it just means allocating maybe 10% like Wall Street traditionally recommended, but doesn't anymore. If enough people do that, we'll probably have enough people around to start the new system whenever that happens.
I like it. I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I hope that we can rise like a phoenix from the ashes, but into a paradigm filled with liberty and justice for all, as opposed to the one world order system that the criminal powers that be would prefer. Our guest has been Brother John, Brother John F., BrotherJohnF.com, Silver for the People. John, again, thanks so much for your time, brother.
Thanks again, Sean.
Thank you. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We do very, very much appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for visiting us at sgtreport.com, thephaser.com, and thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. God bless.